Hi, Susie. Lovely to be with you.
Thank you so much for joining me for the Wellness Unwrapped podcast. This is such a delight. I cannot begin to tell you how excited I am to have you on here. Just to give listeners a bit of a background, I discovered you, Pilar, I think it's around 4 or 5 years ago. And I remember exactly where I was. I was in Greece. It was the summer. I was listening to, I don't know if it would have been called a podcast at that time, but it was a conversation between you and Aviva Rom, who's another fabulous, fabulous person who I had just started following. I think it must have been part of my health coaching, qualification. And she talked to you about ultradian rhythms. And
yes.
I just hung on your every word. And from then I started following your work. So, to get from there to here is really a privilege. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And I love being discovered, particularly by someone elsewhere. It's so nice that we have our global community of health and healing and health improvement experts all over the place. And we are all connected. We're all doing the same kind of work. So thanks for having me.
It's so true. It's my absolute pleasure. So I have read over the summer The Healthy Deviant, which is your incredible book that I feel so passionate about sharing with people. So we're going to be chatting through lots of insights which you share in the book. But first, I'd love you to share with our listeners how you came to be doing this, because you came from a very different background.
Yes, of course. It's really interesting. I often tell people you can never predict how your life is going to go, but somehow when you look backwards, you see the logic of it it could only have been this way. And, my personal story is really what led me into health and wellness, and health improvement and my obsession with disease reversal. But my mother and my dad were, the products of the 1960s. My dad was a sociology professor. My mom was sort of a back to the land hippie type. And I always grew up between different worlds, the worlds of academia and an urban environment where my dad was sort of situated, and then this rural, utopic kind of, the hippie commune world of my mom. And so I always kind of had a foot in two worlds to begin with. What happened to me was that I grew up, I was born in 1967, and, coming into my young childhood in the early 1970s, a lot of what was presented through the media at that point were these very glossy, hyper-perfected images of women with, false eyelashes and beehives. And I mean, almost every era has had its presentation of what an acceptable, attractive woman is like. But there was just a real artifice to everything at that time. And the food was the first round of really heavily processed food that was being presented as what you should eat daily. TV dinners and snack foods, and microwaves started coming out. And this world was the world that I began to see through the media was the normal world. And my world was so different. I mean, my family was always just a weird kind of different family that rejected a lot of social norms out of hand because they were just doing their own thing. My dad is a sociologist, was really interested in why we live the way we live and why our society is the way that it is. But he didn't feel compelled to comply with that. And my mother was really interested in understanding how we could make our lives better by choosing to live differently and going back to the land and having a simpler way of being in agreement with nature's cycles and a less material way of being. So I grew up basically most of my life, a lot of it on this organic farm where I had a very healthy upbringing with organic food and homemade everything, no television, not even really a lot of electricity. So our whole way of life was very natural, very healthy, and very organic and homegrown. And that was fine, except that I was pulled between what I thought was, presented as normal in our society and the way we were living. And I couldn't figure out how I'd get to be that woman that I saw in the magazines and on TV, because that wasn't what my mom was like. And then when I started going to school, I really realized quickly, as my classmates looked at me and my sisters and were like, who are these people? That we did not fit in. And everything about the way we, dressed, talked, ate, conducted ourselves, we just did not fit in with the normal, so-called normal kids. So I started to feel the social pressure of trying to fit in early in my childhood. And what happened to me is what happened to a lot of folks. I kept continuing trying to fit in and be normal. And the more I was successful at constructing myself as a normal person, the less healthy and happy I got. And I started abandoning a lot of what I'd grown up with. And instead of just eating whole foods and eating when I was hungry, I started dieting when I was a teenager. My mother insists I actually put myself on a diet as young as like 8 years old. I don't remember this, but, it was just part of the time. And so as I got less healthy and happy, I started not feeling good, of course. And by the time I got to college, I really had an accumulating list of symptoms. I started having digestive trouble and stress and depression and anxiety, and I wasn't sure what I was going to do. And my skin started getting kind of funky. And a lot of that was the way I was eating, classic college food. Some of it was the way that I was living, which was high stress, not sleeping enough, worrying about my performance all the time, and cortisol and adrenaline flooding my system, being away from home. And this continued to get worse as I studied abroad, as I came home, as I started to get my first jobs, as I kept trying now to get healthier and more fit, because I realized, having lost my health and fitness, that I wanted it back. But then I started looking at all the health and fitness magazines, which this was like the 90s, late 90s, early 2000s, where all of those magazines started to blow up. And then I started trying to take my cues from them. More diets, more exercise, more sure cure fixes for all the things I thought were wrong with me. And that too just didn't really work. I started figuring out some of it by trial and error, and some of it by listening to the lessons of my childhood, because I was like, well, I was healthy once. What was I doing then? But it's interesting, Susie, what happened is that even though I started figuring out the nutrition and exercise part of it, and it did help a lot. I also figured out I had a gluten intolerance, and getting off of gluten helped a lot. The stress and anxiety and trying to measure up piece continued to make me sick. And there was a point where I was breaking out in rashes and having night sweats. I had carpal tunnel. I had just all these hormonal and physical, structural, digestive problems. And mostly what I had was a really unhealthy mindset that told me I had to just be better all the time. I had to do all the things I had to do all in one day, And one day I just kind of hit this literal breaking point where I couldn't accomplish all of the things I felt like I had to do and, look right and be right. And in a fit of frustration, I stomped my foot on the floor of my wooden floored house and broke the bone in my foot when I stamped too hard. Yeah. And, it's not, if you've ever had that experience of breaking a bone, right away that something terrible has happened. Like your body, the integrity of your body breaking, suddenly your skeleton not being in the condition, that it was. You're like, oh my gosh, something very bad has happened here. So what happened to me was basically this sudden flood of insights as the result of breaking my foot. And the first insight was like, oh my God, I just broke myself.
Wow. You literally broke yourself. Gosh.
I literally broke myself.
What a metaphor that is.
It is. And I often ask people to reflect for themselves, are you breaking yourself in the way that you're living? Because the insight that struck me was really, it's scary that I broke my body, but it's not really anything new. When I actually looked at the history of the last 10, 15, 20 years of my life, I had been breaking my body down, and I had all of these accumulating symptoms that so many people have of inflammation, of under repair and under rest, of inadequate nutrition for what I was asking of my body, even though I was eating reasonably well at the time, and of ignoring the signals for a long time where, they just start to accumulate. You have 4 or 5 or 6 different, diagnosable conditions, but they're all coming from one root cause, which for me was the way I was living was overdriving all of my resources. And I was going to have to learn the hard way, which I did. So those insights of like, okay, I'm capable of breaking myself, which is scary. I've been breaking myself for a long time. And then, my initial experience of feeling really bad for myself, like I felt very victimized by the fact that I had broken my own body. And I was like, oh my God, why is this happening to me? And I suddenly had this insight. It wasn't just me. Like I wasn't alone in my self-breakage, and that virtually every friend I had, man, woman, younger, older, had some version of the same set of symptoms of inflammation and struggle, mental and emotional stress. And all of us had been going to the doctor to get creams and powders and pills and potions to try to suppress the symptoms of our body's dis-ease. And some of us had diagnosed conditions, some of us were just waiting for them. But that series of insights really was what led me to the work I've done ever since. I mean, I was already doing the magazine Experience Life I'd launched with Lifetime Fitness in 2001, but a huge body of work came out of those insights, and it's really shifted the way I've approached my journalism, as well, obviously, as my own health improvement and health seeking.
Yeah. Wow. I love that story. And I think what you've touched on there, Pilar, is that, and I think you give the statistics in the book, is that the vast majority of people, are not even covering the fundamentals of caring for themselves in terms of moving a bit every day and eating well, etc. And that most of us, as you say, are on the road to chronic disease. You know, if we haven't got one already, is it 1 in 2 people in the US are suffering with
it's actually worse than that now. It was It was 5 out of 10 when I wrote the book. So it was 50%. This is data from the Centers for Disease Control, who track these things. But at the time I wrote the book, it was 50% of US adults have been diagnosed with at least one chronic condition. And many, of course, had been diagnosed with more. But at that point, you know, there were also a lot of people who had chronic illnesses who just hadn't been diagnosed yet. And now the number is 6 out of 10. That's the number that the CDC is using. So it's actually gotten worse just since, and this book only came out, 6 months ago, came out in January of 2020.
Do you know, it's unbelievable. Like the ink is barely dry on the book, and already it's gone from 5 to 6 out of, it's just extraordinary and terrifying. And I think what your book sets out very, very clearly is that unless we step out of the status quo, that's where we're heading, just by virtue of the fact that that is the status quo.
Yeah, that's right. So it's the path of least resistance, and it's the path of normalcy. So, in the data that you just shared, Susie, I think I open the book with the data because I want people to understand when I talk about healthy deviance and deviating from a norm, I'm talking about a norm in which, for our society and a lot of the so-called civilized world where we've exported Western, food and lifestyle, the way that how quickly you can become ill just by living the normal way is kind of shocking and terrifying. And we see that here in the US when people come from other countries, where they arrive in relatively good shape often. And in the course of 3 to 5 years, they've developed all of the chronic disease states that we consider here to be quite normal by the time people are middle-aged. They have, type 2 diabetes, they have heart disease, they have elevated all kinds of dyslipidemias and, cholesterol, blood pressure, problems with triglycerides. And I think what I believe now is that what passes for normal in our society is crazy. But until you see the data, it's really hard to believe that, in fact, it is more normal to be unhealthy and unhappy than it is to be reasonably happy and healthy and well-adjusted. Yeah. And this is not because we're failing as individuals. This is because our society is failing us. And it takes a wake-up call, often like, hitting your own rock bottom, to come to the realization that you can't keep living the way that you've been told to live without breaking your body down and, confronting one or typically more chronic illnesses through the second half of your life, if not before. Now we have more kids, too, getting sick with all of these same diseases before they're 12.
Yes. Yeah, it's horrendous. It's horrendous. So you have taken the word deviant and you have redefined it, haven't you? Because traditionally, a word with quite negative connotations, that none of us would want to be seen as a deviant. But actually now I hold my hand up and I am proud to be a healthy deviant. I've done your online quiz, which I recommend everybody goes onto the Healthy Deviant website and do this very quick quiz. And you have defined it. So I'm going to read out the Healthy Deviant definition is, according to yourself, is one who willingly defies unhealthy norms and conventions in order to achieve a high level of vitality, resilience, and autonomy. Yeah. So just to put this into context, unless we sign ourselves up as healthy deviants, we just get swept along, don't we?
Yeah.
By this prevailing current.
And we get sucked in. That's right. Yeah. I call the name I've given our society is the unhealthy default reality. And it's kind of like the Matrix, in the film The Matrix, where there's a system that's been set up that we're all living in that we don't even realize we're living in. But it's a reality where all of the automatic, easy default choices are unhealthy choices. And all of the healthy choices are either difficult and inconvenient, or they're expensive and inaccessible. They're anything but automatic. And you know this, as a healthy person who makes healthy choices, it takes effort and intention and to be organized to keep your healthy food in front of you rather than just eating what's put in front of you or what comes out of a machine or out of a fast food drive-through. It's much more difficult to make those healthy decisions. And sometimes, at least in the short run, it can look more expensive. Once you even out all the costs of the medical interventions you're going to be encountering from making unhealthy choices, I believe it's actually much less expensive to make healthy choices. But they're often, not covered by insurance, and they're not subsidized by the same governmental policies and underwriting that the unhealthy choices are. And so the book, goes pretty deep into what are the systems that are producing the society that we're living in. But I think most people are really still just becoming aware that the system exists. And they're not really ready to take on, let me fix the whole world. Look, I'm still trying to deal with myself, And my feeling is that we need more people to have full energy and vitality and resilience and autonomy in order for us to take on the world's larger challenges. And we have gotten to a point right now where, if 6 out of 10 U.S. adults are chronically ill, 70% are overweight or obese, and also dependent on pretty much daily pharmaceutical medications, 80% are not thriving mentally and emotionally. And Susie, as you mentioned, 97.3% right now of U.S. adults aren't practicing even the most basic healthy or health-supporting behaviors. Where does that leave us as a society? Our unhealthy default reality is not only setting people up to fail as human beings, it's like setting us up collectively to fail because we don't have enough healthy people to get involved in turning the ship around. And I understand. I have so much compassion because I've been there where, you wake up, you feel crappy, you try to get through your day of work and you can barely drag yourself through it. You're suffering pain and discomfort. And then, you're stressed out and things aren't going well in your life. And then you try to go to bed at night and you can't sleep because you're anxious and worried. People are drinking more and doing more drugs because they just are trying to numb themselves, or we're watching a ton of TV to distract us, or movies or Netflix or whatever, we're on social media. So it's kind of a vicious cycle. And then our society presents us with the solution to our problems. Oh, you're overweight? Here's a thing for that. Oh, your skin is breaking out? Here's a thing for that. Here's a drug. Here's a powder. Here's a pill. Here's a program. And most of the time, those prescriptions and proposed solutions just don't work that well. And then we end up feeling worse about ourselves. And that just leads us down this cycle of self-blame and shame and depletion that just leaves us even more vulnerable. So a lot of what I've been writing about for the past 20 years is how to turn that cycle around from a vicious one to a virtuous one. I call it the virtuous cycle of healthy deviance, because it is. You're basically saying, I'm opting out of the normal route downward. I'm reversing course, practicing my self-arrest, and choosing to go in a direction that right now only a single-digit percentage, at least here in the US, of adults are choosing.
Yeah. And I think it's really interesting that you have thrown a spotlight on how the remedies are really not helping and are actually making things worse. I think you cite in the book that, is it 45 million Americans have been on a diet or go on a diet? Some ridiculous figure who go on a diet. And yet the success rate is pitiful. Is it
dismal.
5%?
It's dismal.
I mean, what?
Yeah.
5%. I mean, it's just insane that any industry would continue with that level of success. And yet it does. I mean, this is a multi-billion pound industry. And there's always another diet plan, isn't there? There's always another app. There's always something else to sign up to.
Yeah. Well, and we've been trained to think this way. I mean, it is, I talk in the book about, kind of how we arrived here historically, because it's not by accident. The way we're living now is the result of a bunch of designed interventions that we made as human beings in our own lives and that we allowed to be made for us by our governments and our civic life and by, industry. And so we have been programmed by media, among other things, to believe that there's a product that is the solution to our problem. And also we've been really brainwashed into believing that it's our problem. Me personally, me, Pilar, you, Susie, I have this problem. And we have the litany, right? It's like, I have migraines. I have a weight issue. My skin is a problem. But we forget that these problems are shared by like 90% of the rest of the people who are living in our same society. And I believe that now what I suggest is that rather than intervening at the level of your personal symptoms, thinking, which is what everyone wants to do, right? Give me the fix. Doesn't work. We have to begin intervening at the level of the culture and our relationship to the world that we are living in. Because most people already know that they, quote unquote, should be eating more whole foods and more vegetables. And if they're going to be eating, if they're eating meat, they know on some level that the industrial meat supply is not all that healthy. A lot of people just cannot find the wherewithal to shift their daily habits in the direction that they believe would be to their own benefit. And there's a reason that they struggle with that, which is that they are depleted, exhausted, overprescribed, kind of going unconscious and overwhelmed by the mesmerizing society we live in. So I guess ultimately what I believe is that while we are prescribed, we live in a society that produces the problems. We live in a society that prescribes these solutions. When none of them work, the answer is like, it's our fault. There's something wrong with us. I must have gotten the wrong thing. I must not have done it right. So now I go beating up on myself and I kind of miss the whole opportunity to look at it from the outside and go, well, that's not really working for anybody, is it? 97% of people who go on these programs don't get the results that they want, or the results don't stay. Yet we continue to blame ourselves for that. So I'm really proposing a very different approach to the problem. And while it still ends with people who are eating whole foods and people who are moving more often and people who are sleeping better, it's not because they bought into some very specific prescription of macro and micronutrients. It's because they become healthy enough in themselves to begin feeling that it's actually quite doable for them to eat whole foods and they feel better and then they want to do more of that. I mean, I just think our human bodies and minds are programmed to want to be healthy. We just have to get our societal programming out of the way. And that takes some conscious choice and effort too.
It does for sure. And you mentioned that people are overwhelmed, which is just, I mean, we have exactly the same problem here in the UK. And I think also the level of confusion, because the misinformation is so rife and the contradictory information that's fed out. So I just want to give an example because you and I both have worked in the media, me from the PR side, you as a journalist and as an editor. But I was reading a health magazine recently. It was one of the big titles here in the UK. And one of the articles was all about how to eat to be healthy. And it was the person who had written it was a dietitian and who was essentially a mouthpiece for an official government public health body. So that's lovely, great. And it was a double-page spread, okay? So I'm reading the tips and it's your usual great stuff, drink water and eat lots of vegetables, eat your rainbow. And then suddenly one of the tips doesn't quite fit. So I come across one of the tips that says it was kind of slipped in surreptitiously about it was a branded artificial sweetener. And I thought, what was that doing there? Okay, and I kind of, rang an alarm bell. I carried on reading the article. There must have been about 50 tips. Lo and behold, it pops up again, on the opposite page. And, with your healthy swaps and, this nice sweetener. And then it popped in a third time. Now, as a person who's worked in PR for 20 years, I understood that at some point money has changed hands in this instance. Nobody else would know that. It didn't say advert. It didn't say, advertisement feature. There was no intimation that there was any sort of sponsorship, any sort of commercial relationship. That is extremely confusing for a normal reader who is reading an article from a qualified dietitian. This is somebody whose whole life is to do with telling us how to eat properly. And you would take that as read, as like, okay, let me buy that brand of artificial sweetener, which we know has proven to be disastrous for our microbiome, to actually encourage obesity. So what is your take on that what people read in the media?
Yeah. Well, first of all, I want to say that that happens every single day, and I see it everywhere. Here in the U.S., even our official USDA nutrition guidelines, the guidelines that are supposed to be they've informed all of our policies, all of our healthcare. They're terrible. I mean, like 80% of them makes sense, and 20% of them is completely nuts. And it's really more about kind of lifting up parts of the food industry than it is about actually supporting human health. The science that it uses is outdated and bad, and it's really responsible for, there's a lot of evidence that it's supporting the growth of rates of diabetes and heart disease and cancer in this country are directly related to people trying to follow these food guidelines, which are terrible. But when it comes down to the media advertising money, the kind of unholy alliance between industry and education, whether it comes to the media or even the school system, because now it's that same thing happens in public school textbooks, our public school. It happens in the signs that you see in medical, up on the walls in the school health clinic, how to eat healthy. And, like you said, a lot of it makes sense. And then there's a few of these really weird things. And so how do you navigate that as a consumer, as just a regular person who do I believe, right? And one of the things that I suggest in my book is that you do need to become a more sophisticated, scientifically literate student of this kind of information. But that's not easy to do. The shortcut is to find a few people that you trust, or a kind of group of people like functional nutritionists, who I would trust much more than what the typical conventional registered dietitian in this country is trained in. The two methodologies are different. And, a lot of the functional nutritionists that I know will say, look, I studied the sort of official, approved, registered dietitian way and found it didn't work for me, and it didn't work for any of my clients. And then I found my way to a more holistic, functional way of dealing with nutrition. And lo and behold, it works great. But if I practice this way publicly, I will get thrown out of the American Dietetic Association. And if you look at who funds the American Dietetic Association, it's a ton of processed food companies. And if you look inside of the USDA nutrition guidelines and like the myplate.gov tool, where people are supposed to be able to go in and like enter the food they're eating, 98% of the food in that database are brand name processed foods. So, if you have an egg for breakfast and you look up egg, you're going to find Egg McMuffin before you find egg. It's crazy. So when I say unhealthy default reality, that's what I'm talking about, is that all of these big systems that you think of as being authoritative are actually steering you in the wrong way. And if you choose to buck that system, you find yourself having to navigate on your own, which is confusing and difficult. And, my goal is to make it easier for people, but I'm not going to lie, to learn the skills that you need to navigate in our unhealthy default reality, you can't learn all of those skills at once. So it really helps to be part of a community of other health seekers who are learning and thinking this way. It really helps to understand exactly what you just talked about, Susie, which is like, follow the money. Who's sponsoring this? And what are does this feel a little off to you? Is there why are there brand names showing up in this? You have to look at that stuff, take it with a grain. But I have been a health journalist for 20 years, and it's still from time to time, shocking to me where I'm reading along thinking something is editorial. And I go, okay, it is editorial, but I can see that this was editorial, that there was a deal done around,
Yes.
branded content or whatever it is. And it's gotten sneakier and sneakier. And it's just, today it's almost like everyone just kind of accepts that this is the way it is.
Yeah, it's so sophisticated now. It's so sophisticated, so subtle. Because when I started in PR, we had to put advertorial, and it was a very, very clear that this was editorial. No, this was an advert made to look like editorial, but we had to put advertorial. And now I see the waters have got so muddied. And as you say, you had to follow the money. So I'll just give you a couple of examples of things that have happened recently here in the UK. So there's a very big diabetes charity that recently, and I still find this incredible, got into bed with Britvic, who are the guys that make like Fanta and all the fizzy drinks, the sodas,
oh my
to
gosh.
the tune of like £500,000. And I just find that unbelievable that, we have a horrendous epidemic of diabetes, type 2 diabetes in this country, very much caused by, the rise in fizzy drink consumption, or sodas as you call them. And then you get this, as you said, an unholy alliance between the charity and the people who are making the fizzy drinks.
Yeah.
How
so there
can
you go.
that happen?
We produce the problem. We produce the problem of diabetes. Then we create a solution, which is like a research charity that's going to solve this problem. Not really. And then we have the unholy alliance of the money flowing to the charity. It's crazy. I mean, it is, there are so many examples of it that we could both go on and on. Like in the book, I talk about the fact that there was this scandal where they found out that the Coca-Cola company, the fizzy drink producers, were having this illicit exchange with the Centers for Disease Control and actually like lobbying to have policies and perspectives shifted that would go in their favor. We don't want to say, same thing with diabetes, same thing with cancer. You will look at who's sponsoring and sending money and getting these meetings by dark of night or these fancy lunches or whatever they are. And it's a full court press on the part of industry to shift the way policies and funding are going to their favor. And again, like if you're an individual health seeker, you can start to feel like, well, how can I possibly beat that system? I'm just me. How do I go up against all of these big players and find my own way in the midst of going against not all of the advice, because, like I said, 80% of it makes sense. And then 20% of it is just insanity that's completely counterproductive. But to know which is which takes study and takes a lot of awareness that most people don't feel that they have time to even build. So, I really suggest taking a few steps back and not getting so into the weeds with here, like Michael Pollan, one of our great American food writers and nutrition and health writers, talks about the concept of nutritionism, that we have been overwhelmed as consumers of information into thinking that we have to keep track of things like calories, carbs, grams of this, grams of that, read the label, look at this other thing. It can't have more than 10% of this. And it's all too much. Like even in a relatively healthy person's sane world, trying to parse that much information will make you nuts. But what we've lost track of are the most important things, which is like eat whole foods, most of the time, have most of what you eat be whole foods most of the time. And eat a variety of foods because you don't want to eat all one thing. But truly, if you're eating whole foods, your body will probably tell you it doesn't want to eat all one thing. Drink some water, and stop when you're full. Eat when you're hungry, stop when you're full. And, have more going on in your life than just your food. But a simple recipe like that doesn't sell 15 bazillion different articles. It doesn't sell 15 bazillion different products. So when I talk about healthy deviance, what I'm talking about is adjusting your entire approach, understanding that there is a somewhat hostile information universe out there targeting you all the time to try to get you to buy your way to health. more products and solutions, more complex programs. You need to buy the information. And in truth, I think mostly what people need is encouragement and social support to understand how their bodies and minds actually work, and then to get into agreement with the programming of their cells and genes, which right now our society is not really set up to support. So you have to deviate from our social norms to do it.
For sure. And I think so many people have such low expectations of their own health. So I do a lot of corporate wellbeing workshops. I travel all around the UK. Well, I did before lockdown. And I get to listen to a lot of just normal people who work in accounts or HR, whatever. And I see what they're eating and how they view their own health. So just to give you an example, I was doing a workshop before lockdown, and there was a guy there who was probably mid-50s, quite overweight, carrying a lot of extra weight around the belly. And I was explaining what you've just said about the whole foods. I was explaining about healthy fats, etc. And he was like, hang on, what? Are you saying that eggs are healthy? And I said, yes, eggs are really healthy food. And I'd had eggs for breakfast that morning. And he said, what? What are you talking about? He said he had his lunch there. So he had a meal deal, which was, a sandwich, a fizzy drink, packet of crisp potato chips. And he said, I take my statins, I take my blood pressure medication. I used to love eggs, but now I have one egg on my birthday. So once a year, he has an egg. Yeah. But you can't blame him, because this is what he has been led to believe. And he also said, I was explaining about obesity and how it had rocketed since the low-fat food movement. And he said, well, yeah, I'm overweight, but I can go up a flight of stairs, no problem. And that was his benchmark, is if I can walk up one flight of stairs without collapsing, I am healthy. So I think that's where we've got to, is that people don't even expect to have vitality. It's so rare to see vitality in anybody.
Yes.
That we have just got accustomed to that huffing and puffing and falling asleep in the middle of the day and having no energy, as you say.
Yes. And I think people have become accustomed to indigestion. They've become accustomed to constipation. They've become accustomed to skin conditions. And I will say, I'm really for the body positive movement. I'm for how you look is not the most important thing, but what is going on inside your body does show up on the outside. And oftentimes our bodies try to get our attention. What I call, if I can use a swear word, a mild one, pissed off body syndrome. And it often shows up in visible symptoms. So trying to normalize those by saying, cystic acne, severe rashes where your skin is peeling off your body in layers. This is not an aesthetic issue and a cosmetic issue where it's hey, I'm okay the way I am with my skin condition and with my digestive problem and with all of these other attendant issues. It's what are our bodies trying to tell us about the way that we're living, not agreeing with anything that our bodies are programmed to want and need. So it's really, I think a lot of people are in the position that the gentleman you just described are, which is they don't feel good. But they've also been told by medical professionals, this is just part of getting older. You're getting older. Or they're told, hey, you don't feel good because you have a condition. You have heart disease, so you're just going to feel bad. Or you have type 2 diabetes, so this is what's going to happen to you. And I think that a lot of times people are not even given a shred of hope that they can change the circumstances of their health in a way that would let them start feeling better quite quickly. And I would love to just talk briefly about this too, where do you intervene? I really believe our society has insisted to people that they have to start with diet and exercise. And medical professionals, if they're going to suggest any lifestyle intervention, they will basically suggest diet and exercise interventions. And I talk a lot in my book about why I don't think that is the best place to start for a lot of people, namely that most people are overwhelmed and exhausted already, and that both of those interventions demand a high level of discipline and they're disruptive socially. Trying to choose to change the way you eat is hard. So if you do that and you run up against social resistance and you're already tired and depleted and frustrated and not feeling good about yourself and you don't know what you're doing, you're going to find yourself on a failing cycle, quite likely. Or you'll succeed for a little while and then you fall off the wagon and then you beat yourself up for being a weak-willed bad person, which just sets you back. It's like plays into the hands of the unhealthy default reality and puts you at the mercy of the very system that got you feeling so crappy in the first place. So I often suggest to people to begin shifting their vitality by starting with really simple, what I call renegade rituals that are designed to give you back to yourself, to allow you to have more vitality and resilience and autonomy by virtue of just taking more kind, gentle care of yourself. And these are things like a 3-minute morning minutes practice where I suggest, getting up and spending the first 3 minutes before you look at your phone, before you get into the computer or the day's news on the, radio, just spending 3 minutes coming to your waking state gradually and being at home in your own skin and just seeing how you are. A simple thing like that can make such a huge difference because suddenly people realize oh, the way I'm living is actually up to me. I don't have to follow the rote, prescribed way of doing my day. And that little bit of autonomy returns just enough resilience and vitality to someone that they're like, wow, I now want to do more good things for myself. So, there are a lot of ways of approaching health improvement. And if something is working for somebody, I will never tell them to stop that thing. Like if it's working for you and you're doing well by adjusting your nutrition or your fitness, awesome. Keep doing that. Whatever's working, keep doing that. And if you're struggling with it, know that it's not your fault. It's very likely because you're running up against all of the social friction, and you're probably, frankly, overwhelmed and exhausted like almost everybody else, and asking an awful lot of yourself in this moment by insisting that you're going to change these very difficult to change things.
It's so true. And I completely agree with you in everything that you've said. And I think sometimes when people who are struggling with their weight and their health and a whole load of other conditions come to me and they expect me to straight away put them on some sort of very strict eating plan. And I will ask them about, what are you doing to relax, and ask them what they're doing first thing. And as you say, that just little window of giving themselves a few minutes to breathe deeply. And you talked about 3 minutes. That's very accessible. That's very accessible, isn't it? For even the busiest of people to find that 3 minutes.
Yeah. And I think that that's the key is that, a lot of the research, like, BJ Fogg's work at Stanford, talks about tiny steps and tiny habits. And I do think if you can create a small scale success for yourself and feel the difference from that, you will be much more motivated to go bigger. And really this practice came for me because I was trying to do 30 minutes a day of yoga or meditation, and I just kept failing. And I felt like I was practicing how to do it wrong, So setting myself a really tiny base minimum, like 3 minutes, is really useful for me. Because I win at it a lot. And also because when I don't do it, I can ask myself this question of how is it that I can't make 3 minutes for myself? What is the mindset that is producing that for me? And typically what I say is how you do anything is how you do everything. That's a Zen saying. I didn't make that up, but I like it a lot. And, the truth is the way that you are running into trouble doing even a 3-minute simple morning minutes practice, anything you want. You could pet your dog, play your guitar, just walk outside and listen to the birds. When that's the only demand and I'm not able to do it, it's really an indication that my life is out of balance and that I've become a slave to my own mindset, which is I have to do everything first before I take care of myself. And that's really the mindset that breaks me down. I know that from long experience.
Yeah. And what that has reminded me of is you talk a lot in the book about listening to your body's call, even to go to the bathroom to do a wee. I know you call it a pee in the States. Yes. So, and that just reminded me, and this is such an embarrassing story, but I'm going to share it because I just feel it's relevant for listeners to understand where I was mentally. So, I once worked in a really demanding environment that was horrific, to be honest. I was there for a year in a PR agency. And it was a sort of environment where no matter how hard you worked, you could never, ever get on top of what you needed to do. And I remember one morning, maybe it was around midday, and I was working solidly. And I suddenly remembered, I haven't actually gone to do a wee yet. So I sort of finished the sentence that I was on. I was writing a press release or whatever. And I walked to the bathroom, which was maybe 10 feet away. But I didn't want to waste any of that time. So as I was walking, I was talking to myself. I need to call this client. I need to da-da-da-da-da. So anyway, I get to the toilet and I'm doing my wee. And after a few seconds, I was like, I don't have time to finish this wee. And I literally zipped up. I mean, I guess the good news is I had strong pelvic floor muscles, but I literally zipped up and went back to my desk. And,
yes,
the reason I think I remember that, because this was 19 years ago. And normally you probably wouldn't remember, Pilar, going to the toilet like last Tuesday, because you wouldn't unless something really bad happened. But I remember this. And I think it's because on some level, a kind of tiny voice said, really? Is this what we're doing now? We're rationing our wee time? And I think on some level, I knew that I had crossed a line and that this was not right.
Yes.
But it's really sad. I mean, it makes me sad to think that I would do that to myself.
Yeah. I mean, it is, like I said, it's one of those revelations of a moment. For me, it took me breaking my bone, but there were indications like that much earlier. And it's interesting you mentioned that, I have one of the questions in the Are You a Healthy Deviant quiz, which you referenced earlier.
Yes.
And what is your response when you feel you have to go to the bathroom? Like heeding the call immediately or negotiating with yourself, I'll do it later. I'm too busy right now. And I include that question because to me, it really gets at the essence of autonomy and of self-value. And those things are really, really important in choosing a healthy way of life in an unhealthy world. You have to be willing to notice when the society is pushing you in a direction that is antithetical to your own well-being. And you have to be willing to practice repeatedly the very difficult decision to do what needs doing for you first. I often use the example, too, of drinking water. I'll be in the middle of an interview like this. I start drinking water. I model that for people when I'm thirsty. I'll just say, excuse me a minute, I'm going to get a drink. I'm thirsty. And I'm like, I want you to do this in a meeting. If you're in the middle of talking and you're thirsty, or you're about to go into a meeting and you need to take a drink first before you go in, be a minute late. Take a moment of awkward silence to drink the water. What's happening is that you're practicing in that moment healthy deviance, the act of doing for yourself what the society will not encourage you to do in the service of your own health and well-being. The next day, it might be going to bed when you're tired. The next day, it might be stopping eating while everyone else is still eating, or choosing to eat something like an egg that someone near you is like, that's unhealthy and it's going to give you heart disease. And you're like, yeah, I heard that. I'm eating my egg, And so every day, there are literally 1,000 decisions, maybe more, that you're making. Like the media being on or off, you getting up or going to bed at a certain time, what you choose to put in or on your body, how you move or don't move, what your level of expectation is for how you want to feel, even when everyone else is walking around sick and tired and exhausted. To choose to show up with more vitality and health than other people is itself a revolutionary act. Yeah. And it's the culmination of thousands of other revolutionary and healthy deviant acts.
I love that. And as you say, vitality is our birthright. You write in the book.
Yes,
that
it is.
We all have this right to it, but we need to claim it. We need to proactively claim it, because nobody is coming to help us, are they? No kind of official body is going to ride in and save our health. We kind of need to find our way back to health.
That's right.
Ourselves.
That's exactly it. It takes that willingness to know that you will have to depart from the path most traveled. And the reason, honestly, I wrote the book, a lot of what's in the book there are ideas, thoughts I've been having for years, and I just didn't have a place to put them all in one spot. And I really felt like I wanted to create a guide that people could have sitting out and open on any given day. They don't even have to read the book cover to cover, but it's just like, it's so hard to choose that path of noncompliance. I wanted there to be a companion guide. It's like my survival guide. Basically, it's like a handbook to survival in the modern era. And to do what other people aren't doing, I think we have to find fellow travelers. We need support systems and our guides and our posse around us. So I love the work you're doing, Susie, because I know you're inspiring and guiding people every day. And it's going to take a village. It's going to take all of us coming together and helping and supporting each other year by year, decision by decision. We can change our society that way.
Oh, absolutely. And thank you so much for that. It really means a lot to me. So how can people start if they've listened to you today and they think, okay, right, I want to be a healthy deviant? So they can go to, just give us the website details and where they can start.
Absolutely. The best place to go is healthydeviant.com. And at healthydeviant.com, you can find links to the quiz we were talking about, as well as a free preview of my book. You can download the whole first chapter if you'd like from my website. But links to all the other stuff I do too, podcasts and online courses. I am just launching this thing I'm really excited about called Healthy Deviant U, which is an ongoing guided program that helps people find their way onto the path of healthy deviance and stay there. Because I've really discovered from readers, coming back to me and saying, this is how I want to live. Now, how can I keep going? How can I keep doing this in the face of all the obstacles that I'm dealing with? Because it isn't a one and done thing. Like I said, it's not like a diet or an exercise program. It's really a navigation system for being healthy in an unhealthy world. So healthydeviant.com. And you can find me also on all my social channels. But my name is a little hard to spell, and Healthy Deviant is pretty easy to spell. So I always search on that and you'll find me after that, Pilar.
Amazing. So, Pilar, I want to thank you for all the inspiration you've given me personally. Your amazing book, The Healthy Deviant, I recommend everybody get a copy of this. It really is an extraordinary read. And I'm just so excited to watch what you do from here.
Thank you so much, Susie. That's lovely. Thank you.
Really, and thank you so much for coming on today. And I'm very proud to be a fellow traveler on this path, a fellow healthy deviant. And I hope that we inspire many people from today to sign up to Healthy Deviance and hopefully to start to get their health back.
Right on. I love it. Together we can make it happen, all of us. Thank you so much, Susie. It's been a real fun talk with you.
You too. Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye.